10 years ago, the most feared mafia boss in Korea threw his pregnant wife out of the country. No explanation, no farewell, no mercy. He chose his empire over her. He chose power over love. He chose wrong. Now she's back. And she didn't come back broken. She came back as a billion-dollar queen with an army of lawyers, a private jet, and a 10-year-old daughter who has her father's eyes. The man who exiled her is standing at the arrival's gate right now. And he has no idea that the woman stepping off that plane is about to make him pay for every single night she cried alone. Stay with me until the end of this story. If it moves you, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The mansion sat on a hill above Seoul like something designed to intimidate the sky itself. Stone walls, surveillance cameras embedded in the architecture at angles that left no shadow uncovered. Iron gates that required 3 separate authorization codes to open, and a 4th if you were arriving after midnight. Ma Kang-jae had built it that way deliberately, not because he feared any specific enemy, but because he had learned early in his life that power was 90% perception. You made people believe you were unreachable. You made them believe that even the idea of crossing you required more courage than most men possessed. And then, if they tried anyway, you proved them right. He was 41 years old now and had run the Crimson Tiger Syndicate for 14 of those years, inheriting it from a father who had inherited it from his own father before that, the whole lineage stretching back through decades of blood and silence and carefully maintained fear. The syndicate controlled port operations along the western coast, had interests in construction, entertainment, private security, and the kind of financial arrangements that never appeared in any ledger visible to a government auditor. It was not a small operation. It was not a fragile one. Kang-jae had spent the better part of a decade reinforcing every vulnerable point in the network, neutralizing rivals before they could organize, absorbing smaller factions through a combination of negotiation and demonstrated consequence. He was, by every measurable standard, winning, which was exactly why he couldn't sleep. It was 3 a.m. and he was sitting in the study on the mansion's 2nd floor, the room where he conducted private meetings and made the kind of decisions that couldn't be committed to paper. The desk was obsidian-topped, imported, expensive in a way that was meant to signal permanence rather than wealth. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, though most of the volumes were there for the architecture of the space rather than any genuine literary purpose. One shelf, however, held actual books, a narrow collection, worn spines, pages that had been touched many times. Kang-jae did not look at those books tonight. He hadn't looked at them in a long time. On the desk in front of him sat a single photograph. It was not large, standard print size, the kind you could slip into a wallet, which was exactly where he had kept it for 10 years until the lamination began to crack at the corners, and he had been forced to remove it before it deteriorated entirely. The woman in the photograph was laughing at something outside the frame. She was standing on the rooftop terrace of the apartment they had shared during what Kang-jae now understood, with the clarity that only permanent loss could produce, to have been the best period of his life. Her skin was deep brown, luminous in the afternoon light that fell across the rooftop that day. Her hair was pulled back but escaping in several directions at once. She was not posed. She had not known the photograph was being taken. That was why it looked the way it did. Unguarded, real, belonging to a version of the world that no longer existed. Her name was Zuri Okoye. He had not spoken her name aloud in nearly a decade. He thought it constantly, in the way that a man thinks about the thing that cost him the most, but he had made a practice of not saying it where anyone could hear. Language made things real in a different way than memory did. Memory you could sometimes manage. Words were harder to take back. His phone vibrated on the desk surface. He looked at the screen without touching it. The number belonged to Park Do-yoon, his consigliere, the man who had run the syndicate's internal operations for going on 12 years and who was one of perhaps 4 people on Earth that Kang-jae trusted without reservation. He let it vibrate through to silence. Then he picked up the photograph, looked at it for approximately 3 seconds, and placed it face down in the desk drawer. He was not ready for conversation. Not at 3 a.m, not with Zuri's face still burning somewhere behind his eyes. The problem with what he had done 10 years ago, and Kang-jae was not a man who avoided naming his problems, because naming them was the first step toward controlling them. The problem was that it had made complete necessary sense at the time. That was what made it unbearable. He hadn't exiled her in a moment of cruelty or carelessness. He had done it with cold, calculated deliberateness because the alternative was watching her die. The conspiracy that had been closing around the Crimson Tiger Syndicate in those years was not the product of any single rival. It was an international arrangement, multiple criminal organizations from 3 different countries coordinating against the syndicate in a way that Kang Jae had not seen coming until it was already dangerously close. The Cho family, the syndicate's oldest allied faction in the South, had been applying pressure for an arranged marriage between their eldest son and a woman inside the Crimson Tiger's inner circle. That pressure was not romantic in origin. It was political. The Cho family wanted a permanent structural alliance, and an arranged marriage was the instrument they had chosen to formalize it. The problem was that Kang Jae was already married. He and Zuri had married quietly, without ceremony, in a private arrangement that most of the syndicate's senior members either didn't know about or chose to pretend they didn't. Intermarriage between Korean mafia families and outsiders was not unheard of, but a Nigerian woman with no criminal connections, no family leverage, no political utility, it was the kind of choice that invited questions about whether the boss was thinking with his head. Kang Jae had never cared what his lieutenants thought about his personal life, and for 2 years, that indifference had been sustainable. Then the international cartel had begun feeding information to the Cho family. Specifically, they had sent evidence, fabricated, Kang Jae now knew, with absolute certainty, though he had not known it then, suggesting that Zuri was an intelligence asset. A planted operative whose relationship with Kang Jae was not romantic but strategic. The documentation had been meticulous. Payment records, communication logs, a manufactured biography connecting her to an international financial crimes unit that had been trying to penetrate Korean organized crime networks for years. Do-yoon had brought it to him in person. He had laid it on this same desk, in this same study, and Kang Jae had sat where he was sitting now and read every page of it twice. He had not wanted to believe it. That was the truth he could still feel in his chest when he thought about it. That raw, visceral refusal to accept what the documents were telling him. But he was a man who had survived 14 years at the head of a criminal empire by making decisions based on evidence rather than preference, and the evidence had been overwhelming. The Cho family knew about Zuri. The cartel knew about Zuri. Multiple factions with the power to destroy the syndicate were using her existence as leverage, and whether she was an operative or simply a liability, the calculus came out the same. She had to go. He had told himself it was protection, that sending her away, far away, severing all official ties, was the only way to guarantee she wouldn't be used as a target or a pressure point. He had told himself she would build a life somewhere safe, somewhere the syndicate's enemies couldn't reach her. He had told himself a great many things during the 2 days between making the decision and delivering it. What he had not done was give her the chance to respond. He had called her into this same study, and he had told her, without preamble or preparation, that their marriage was over, that he was dissolving it under the syndicate's private legal mechanisms, which operated outside the standard civil registration system, that she would be given a financial settlement and a first-class flight out of Korea, and that she should not come back. He had watched her face change as he spoke. He had watched the initial confusion give way to disbelief. The disbelief hardened into a kind of terrible stillness, and then that stillness fracture into something he couldn't name. Not quite grief, not quite rage, something that lived between them and was more devastating than either. She had not cried. Zuri Okoye did not cry in front of people who were hurting her. He had known that about her. He had loved that about her. He had used it against her. She had said very quietly, "Is this actually happening?" It was not a question. It was a statement being offered to the room, to the universe, to whatever force governed the moment when a person's life split irrevocably in two. He had said, yes. She had looked at him for a long time. He had held her gaze because he owed her that much. He had not explained. He had not told her about the cartel or the Cho family or the manufactured evidence, because every instinct in his body told him that if she knew the real reason, she would refuse to go. She would insist on fighting it with him, and she would die. She had left the next morning. What he had not known, what he could not have known, because she had discovered it herself only 2 days before and had not yet found a way to tell him, was that she was pregnant. He found the baby bracelet 3 weeks later in the pocket of a jacket she had left behind. Small and white, with a card clipped to the clasp that read, in a handwriting he would have recognized in complete darkness, "For when the time comes." Beneath the jacket, folded into a precise square, was a note. 3 sentences. He had read those 3 sentences so many times in the years since that he no longer needed the paper to recall them. He had them the way you have something that has become part of you, integrated into your biology. "I was going to tell you the night you told me. I think you should know there will be a child. I won't be asking you for anything." He had stood in that room for 40 minutes holding the bracelet. He had not called anyone. He had not moved. He had simply stood there while the full magnitude of what he had done settled over him like something structural collapsing, like a wall coming down, the kind of damage that doesn't announce itself with noise but with sudden total absence of support. He had sent her away pregnant. He had sent her away without knowing. He had sent her away, and somewhere in the world there was now a child who had never met their father, because their father had made a decision based on forged documents that he would not discover were forged for another 6 years. The phone vibrated again. Do-yoon. Kang Jae picked it up this time. "It's 3 a.m, he said. "I know what time it is." Do-yoon's voice was its usual register, measured, professional, carrying none of the deference that most of the syndicate's inner circle offered Kang Jae, even in casual conversation. That was why Kang Jae trusted him. The man spoke to him like a peer. "There's a development, the Apex Horizon announcement." Kang Jae said nothing for a moment. He was aware of the announcement. The entire Korean business community had been aware of it for 6 weeks. Apex Horizon Global, a London-based investment firm with a portfolio that had been quietly astonishing financial analysts for the better part of a decade, had announced its intention to make its largest single investment in South Korean infrastructure and technology. The numbers being discussed were staggering, the kind of capital infusion that didn't just attract attention but reshape the terrain of an entire market sector. Government ministers had been photographed looking interested. The major conglomerates had begun positioning themselves to be attractive targets. "What about it?" Kang Jae said. "The CEO is arriving tomorrow. Incheon. Private jet, 11 a.m, full media presence." "I'm aware." "The CEO," Do-yoon said, and paused in a way that was not his habit, "has been confirmed as a woman named Amara's mother." Kang Jae went very still. "Say that again," he said, though he had heard it perfectly. "The identity has been verified by our intelligence team. The CEO of Apex Horizon Global is operating under the name Zara Osei. But the documentation, the real documentation, not the public profile, traces back to a different identity. The woman's original name is Zuri Okoye." Another pause. "She's been in London for 9 years. She built the firm from scratch. The assets under management are currently valued at approximately $1.3 billion US. The study was very quiet. Kang Jae looked at the desk drawer where the photograph was lying face down. He was aware of his own breathing in a way he wasn't usually aware of it, that involuntary monitoring of a physical system suddenly demanding conscious attention. "The child," he said. "The team found records of a minor registered under the same household. A girl, 10 years old." A brief silence. "Her name is Amara." He closed his eyes. He had searched. That was the thing he needed to understand about himself, the thing that coexisted with the guilt in a way that didn't resolve it but complicated it. He had searched for her. For 4 years following the departure, working through a network of investigators across 3 continents, spending resources he would not have disclosed to anyone in the syndicate, he had looked for Zuri Okoye. She had vanished with a completeness that he respected even as it destroyed him, covering her trail with the kind of intelligence that suggested she knew exactly how a man like him would search. She had built a new identity, not by hiding, but by becoming someone else so thoroughly that there was nothing to find because there was no gap between the performance and the reality. He had eventually stopped searching. Not because he had given up, but because he had accepted, at some point in the 5th year, that if she didn't want to be found, she wouldn't be, and that forcing the issue was not something he had the right to do. He had made the choice that put her on that plane. The consequences of that choice included living with not knowing, until now. "She's bringing the daughter," Kang Jae said. "Yes." Amara will be with her at the arrival. The media will be present. It's a public event. He opened his eyes. The study looked the same as it always looked. The desk, the bookshelves, the overhead light casting its familiar geometry across the floor. Everything in its place. Everything exactly as it had been 5 minutes ago, before the world shifted on its axis. "I'll be at Incheon," he said. "I expected that," Do-yoon said. "I'll arrange the detail." "No detail. 2 men, plain clothes, perimeter only. I'm not walking into that airport like I'm expecting trouble." "You're always expecting trouble." "I'm expecting this to be complicated enough without adding spectacle." He paused. "Do-yoon?" "Yes." "She doesn't know I'm coming." "No," Do-yoon said. "She doesn't." He ended the call. He sat in the study for another hour without moving, without looking at anything in particular, the kind of stillness that was not peace but its opposite, the held breath before a confrontation with something you had been moving toward for 10 years without knowing the direction. He thought about the morning she left. He had not watched her go. He had made the decision not to watch because he knew that watching would break something in him that he needed to keep intact in order to function. It was the most coldly rational thing he had ever done, and it was also the worst. You could dress a cruelty in the language of strategy, and it was still a cruelty. He pulled the drawer open and turned the photograph face up. She was still laughing at something outside the frame. He placed it back in his wallet. But the Incheon International Airport terminal was chaos organized to look like order. The press corps had been present since 7 in the morning, despite an 11 o'clock arrival, occupying the international arrivals area with the particular territorial intensity of journalists who had been competing for positioning since before breakfast. Camera operators staked out elevated angles. Reporters adjusted earpieces and rehearsed transitions. 3 separate television networks had set up broadcast positions along the arrivals barrier, each one trying to outflank the others by approximately 18 inches. The story had the elements that the media required to sustain extended coverage: enormous money, international intrigue, and a CEO whose identity had been deliberately obscured throughout the rise of Apex Horizon Global. The firm had communicated exclusively through press releases and legal representatives for its first several years of operation. When the CEO had finally begun making public appearances, she did so in a style that gave journalists very little to work with. No personal interviews, no social media presence, responses to profile requests that were polite and final. The mystery had not been strategically constructed, as far as anyone could tell. It appeared to be genuine preference, which made the airport arrival, with its guaranteed photographic access and the presence of the daughter who apparently went everywhere with her, the closest thing to a scoop that the business press had been offered in some time. Makong Jae arrived at the terminal at 10:15 in a car he was not usually associated with, driven by a man whose face was not familiar to the journalists who occasionally photographed syndicate-adjacent figures. He wore a dark coat that was unremarkable for the season, and positioned himself at the edge of the civilian observation area with a view of the arrivals gate and the corridor leading to it. He was not wearing anything that identified him. He was not accompanied by the kind of retinue that his position usually generated. If anyone recognized him, they gave no indication. He had slept for approximately 3 hours. He looked exactly like a man who had slept for approximately 3 hours. Sharp-eyed, in the specific way that exhaustion and adrenaline produced when they worked together, which was different from the sharpness of actual rest. His jaw was set. He had not eaten breakfast. He was aware that he was standing at the arrivals gate of an international airport to do something he could not have fully articulated if someone had asked him to, because the truth was that he did not have a plan. He had spent 14 years operating on plans and contingencies and fallback positions, and this morning he had walked into the most significant confrontation of his personal life with nothing but the fact of his presence. It was not his best work. At 10:58, the arrivals board updated. The private aviation terminal adjacent to the main building had cleared the Apex Horizon aircraft through customs, and the party was en route through the internal corridor. The press corps shifted collectively, a kind of kinetic anticipation moving through the assembled journalists and photographers like current through a conductor. The arrivals door opened. The security team came first, 4 individuals whose bearing announced their professional purpose without any visible insignia. Then 2 people who appeared to be lawyers or advisors, carrying documents and moving with the particular focused urgency of people whose job was logistics. Then a child. Amara Ma, though she didn't know that name yet because no one had told her, was 10 years old, and she walked through an international airport arrivals terminal with the unhurried self-possession of someone who had been doing it since before she had the vocabulary to describe what airports were. She was dressed simply, a dark blue coat, her hair in a style that framed her face cleanly. She was looking at the assembled press with an expression that was not intimidated and not performing confidence either. It was something more genuine than performance, a kind of settled curiosity that belonged to a child who had been raised by someone who thought carefully about what kind of person they were producing. She had Kang Jae's jaw, the line of it, the particular set. He was standing 40 feet away, and he could see it with a clarity that felt almost violent in its precision. Then Zuri came through the door. 10 years was a fact he understood intellectually. 10 years was a measurable period of time with a number attached to it. 10 years was something he could calculate and acknowledge and process as information. What it was not, he discovered in the 3 seconds after she appeared, was something that had diminished her. She was not the woman who had stood in his study with her face changing. She was something that had grown from that woman, something that had taken the grief and the humiliation and the extraordinary circumstances of starting over on another continent and used all of it as fuel. She moved through the arrivals door the way the ocean moved, with a force that didn't announce itself as force because it didn't need to. She was wearing a coat the color of deep burgundy that hit just above the knee, her hair sculpted and precise, her posture not rigid but absolute. She was looking at the press corps with an expression that gave them nothing they hadn't earned. She was the most powerful-looking person in the terminal. Kang Jae had not exhaled since she appeared. He exhaled now. He was aware that his hands had closed into fists inside the pockets of his coat, an involuntary response, the body conducting its own operations while the mind was occupied elsewhere. He unclenched them deliberately. He needed to get to her. He needed to navigate 40 feet of terminal space and the assembled press corps and whatever security arrangements had been made. And he needed to find words that were adequate to the distance between where they were standing and where they needed to be, which was a distance that had almost nothing to do with geography. He started moving. He had covered perhaps 15 feet when he noticed it. It was a small thing. A man near the far left of the terminal, against the structural column that ran floor to ceiling near the service corridor entrance. Average height, unremarkable clothing, holding a press credential at a slightly wrong angle. Not the practiced ease of someone who wore credentials daily, but the deliberate positioning of someone who wanted the credential visible. His eyes were not on Zuri or Amara. They were scanning the perimeter. Kang Jae had spent 14 years learning to distinguish between people who were watching a scene and people who were watching an event they were about to participate in. He stopped walking. His eyes moved to the opposite side of the terminal. Another man, near the secondary entrance. Same quality of attention, same wrong ease. And at the security checkpoint near the arrivals barrier, a uniformed officer whose posture was fractionally too rigid, whose right hand was resting in a position that was not natural for someone performing standard crowd management. 3 of them, minimum. Possibly more he hadn't identified yet. The press corps was oblivious. Zuri's team was moving her toward the barrier where the media would have sanctioned access, the advisors flanking her, Amara at her left side. The girl was looking at something on the far wall, a display, probably, or the crowd itself, with the same unhurried interest she'd walked in with. Kang Jae's phone was in his hand. He called the 2 plainclothesmen he'd posted outside without speaking, a single click pattern they had established for emergency escalation, and he started moving again, faster now, cutting diagonal through the civilian area, his eyes locked on the man near the column who had just dropped his hand from the press credential to somewhere near his waistband. He was not going to make it in time. He could see the geometry of it. Zuri was 8 feet from the arrivals barrier. Amara was at her side. The man at the column was beginning to move. The officer at the security checkpoint was shifting his weight. He was 12 feet away when the first shot was fired. It came from somewhere above, not a floor up, but elevated. A shooter positioned in the mezzanine level that ran above the arrivals hall, and it was not aimed at Kang Jae or Zuri or any of the 4 security personnel flanking her. It was aimed at Amara. The terminal erupted. The press corps dissolved into pure chaos, cameras swinging, bodies dropping, the sound of the shot still reverberating off the high ceilings as the crowd fractured. Zuri's security responded immediately, grabbing her and pulling her toward the floor, but the girl was a half second off the pull. She had turned at some instinctive response to something, and the trajectory was going to. Kang Jae covered the remaining distance in a motion he could not have subsequently described as a series of steps, because it wasn't. He came in from the left, and he put himself between Amara and the angle of the shot, and he felt the second round catch him in the left shoulder, the way you feel something when your nervous system is running on emergency protocol. Not as pain, not yet, but as impact, as force, as a physical fact being deposited into his body. He had his arm around the girl. She was stiff with shock. She had not screamed. She was breathing very fast and her eyes were huge and she was looking at him, this stranger who had just materialized from the chaos and taken a bullet in the process of appearing, with an expression that was too complicated for a 10-year-old to have, except that this particular 10-year-old was apparently constructed from more complicated material than most. "Down," he said, and it came out rougher than he intended because his shoulder was beginning to communicate with the rest of his body in escalating terms. "Stay down, stay behind me." He heard Zuri's voice from 3 feet away. It cut through everything, the screaming crowd, the additional shots being exchanged now between the men he'd identified and the plainclothes team he'd signaled, the terminal's emergency systems beginning to activate. Her voice came through all of it with the particular frequency that belonged only to her, and what it said. What she said in the moment. She looked across the floor and saw the man crouched over her daughter, with blood spreading through the left shoulder of his coat, was not a scream and not a question. It was his name. After 10 years of not saying it, after the 5 years of searching and the 5 years of trying to stop searching, after a decade of a photograph in a wallet, and 3 sentences in a note and a small white bracelet that he still kept in the desk drawer where the photograph had been tonight, after all of it, he heard his name in her voice. And Ma Kang-jae looked up and met the eyes of the woman he had destroyed, and there were at least 4 armed men still moving through the terminal, and his shoulder was shot, and her daughter was pressed against his side with her hands gripping his coat, and none of that mattered as much as the single, shattering fact that they were in the same room again for the first time in 10 years. And she already knew. She knew from the way his body had moved, from the decision his body had made before his mind could intervene, from the single involuntary act of a man who had spent a decade trying to find a way to undo what he'd done. She already knew that whatever she had believed about him for 10 years was not the whole truth. Her expression was not warm. It was not forgiving. It was something far more dangerous than either. It was uncertain. And in the arithmetic of where they had been and where they were, uncertainty was the most devastating development possible. Because it meant there was still a question, and questions, unlike conclusions, could not be closed. The emergency exits were 30 feet to the east. His men had neutralized the shooter from the mezzanine, but there were still hostiles moving through the main terminal. He had a 10-year-old girl under his arm and a bullet in his shoulder, and the woman he had exiled a decade ago was looking at him with an expression he had not earned and could not yet explain. "We have to move," he said. Not to her, not asking. Just stating the fact of the situation, the operational reality that superseded everything else. Zuri looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at her daughter, at Amara, who was watching Kang-jae with those enormous, complicated eyes. And she made the same kind of calculation she had apparently been making for 10 years. Fast, private, entirely her own. "Move," she said. And they ran. They came out through the emergency exit on the east side of the terminal into a service corridor that smelled like jet fuel and industrial cleaning solution, the kind of smell that existed in the infrastructure of every major airport and never made it into any of the public-facing areas. Fluorescent lighting, concrete floor. The sound of the chaos in the main terminal muffled now but not gone, the emergency alarm cutting through the walls at a frequency that made the air vibrate. Kang-jae had Amara's wrist, not gripping it, but maintaining contact, a functional hold that kept her moving at his pace while he tracked the corridor ahead. His left shoulder was producing a sensation that had graduated from impact to something more specific and unpleasant. A deep, insistent pressure radiating down into his arm that told him the bullet had not passed through cleanly. His coat was wet on that side. He was aware of it the way you were aware of a problem you could not address in the present moment. Cataloged, filed, deferred. Behind him, Zuri moved without being told to. Her security had been reduced to 1 man, the others either neutralized or cut off in the main terminal during the initial exchange. The one who remained, tall, Korean-British from his accent, the kind of focused professional composure that didn't rattle easily, had his weapon drawn and was covering the rear of the group with the economic efficiency of someone who had done it before. They reached a junction. Kang Jae stopped. His two plainclothes men materialized from the left corridor. One had a cut above his eye that had bled down his face and dried in a streak. The other was entirely unmarked but breathing hard, which meant he had been running. "Vehicle?" Kang Jae said. "Parking structure B, level 2, 30 seconds if we move now." "How many are still active in the terminal?" "At least 2, possibly 3. The mezzanine shooter is down. The one near the column got out through the service entrance on the west side before we could close," which meant someone was already ahead of them. Kang Jae turned that information over quickly, calculating. The west service entrance opened onto a road that fed directly to the short-term parking structure. If the hostile from the column had gone that direction, he had either panicked and run, or he was repositioning. "We're not going to the parking structure," Kang Jae said. "Underground loading bay. The freight access." His man hesitated. "That adds 4 minutes. 4 minutes is preferable to being shot in a parking structure." He looked at Zuri's security operative. "Can you hold a rear position for 4 minutes?" The man glanced at Zuri. A question without words, authorization from his actual employer. Zuri said, "Yes, he can." Kang Jae moved. The underground loading bay was accessed through a stairwell that required a maintenance code he had obtained through the syndicate's operational network 3 hours ago, when Do-yoon had still been telling him the arrival was a routine business event, and Kang Jae had been telling himself the same thing while quietly preparing for every other possibility. The code worked. The door opened into a low-ceilinged space that held 2 freight vehicles, and the particular silence of a room that was not supposed to have people in it. There was a car here. A plain, dark sedan, the kind that attracted nothing. One of his men had positioned it 40 minutes ago as a contingency that Kang Jae had not expected to use. He had expected to use it. He had simply not said so. He got the rear door open. Amara got in without being asked. She had not spoken since the terminal. She was not crying. She was watching everything. Watching him, watching her mother, watching the men moving around her. With those dark, steady eyes that had been processing the situation with a thoroughness that was frankly unsettling in a child her age. He turned to give Zuri the door. She was already looking at him, not at his shoulder, though she had clearly registered it, at his face. There was a quality to the way she was looking at him that he recognized, not from the Zuri who had stood in his study 10 years ago, but from the version of her that had just walked through an international arrivals terminal with a billion-dollar empire behind her and given the press corps absolutely nothing. It was the look of a woman who was assembling information and would not be rushed in the assembly of it. "Get in the car," he said. "Don't tell me to get in the car. There may still be a hostile in the structure above us. Get in the car. I've been managing hostile situations for 10 years without your input." But she got in the car. She sat beside her daughter, and she put her arm around Amara with the automatic precision of a woman whose body knew exactly where her child was at every moment, and she looked straight ahead. He got in the front passenger seat. His driver, the same man who had brought him to the terminal, pulled out before the doors were fully closed. The loading bay gate opened onto a service road that ran behind the airport's eastern perimeter. They were through it and merging onto the expressway in under 90 seconds, the airport receding behind them, the Seoul skyline beginning to assemble itself in the distance. The emergency vehicles were visible now, heading toward the terminal from the opposite direction. Lights going, the official version of the morning's events beginning to activate. The car was quiet. It was the specific quiet of a space in which multiple people had significant things to say to each other, and none of them were saying any of them yet. Kang Jae's shoulder was making its complaints known with increasing volume. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat with his right hand, the movement controlled, deliberate, minimal, and retrieved his phone. He sent Do-yoon a 3-word message and put the phone away. From the back seat, Amara said, "You're bleeding through your coat." Her voice was even, observational, the kind of voice that belonged to a child who had been taught to name what she saw rather than to panic at it. "I know," Kang Jae said. "Does it hurt?" "It's manageable." "That's not what I asked." He turned his head slightly. The girl was looking at him with an expression that was not unkind but was absolutely direct, and it struck him with a force he had not been prepared for that she had his eyes. Not Zuri's, his. The particular angle of them, the set. He had noticed it in the terminal and filed it as information he could not yet fully process, but in the enclosed space of the car with 4 feet of distance between them, it was not information. It was a fact demanding acknowledgement. Yes, he said. It hurts. Amara nodded, as though this was the correct answer and she had simply needed it confirmed. She looked at her mother. Zuri was looking out the window, her jaw set, her hand still on Amara's knee. "Mom?" Amara said. "I know," Zuri said. "Do you know him?" A silence that lasted approximately 3 seconds, which was, under the circumstances, its own kind of answer. "We knew each other," Zuri said, "a long time ago." Amara looked at Kang Jae again. He held the look because he owed her that much. Owed her, at minimum, the dignity of not looking away from her scrutiny. "You knew which way the shot was coming from," Amara said. "Before it happened, I saw you moving before the sound. I noticed some things in the terminal that suggested the situation wasn't safe. You moved to cover me specifically." He said nothing. "You didn't cover my mother first," Amara said. "Her security team covered her. You covered me. Why?" The car moved through an interchange, the city sliding past the windows in the gray morning light. Kang Jae was aware of Zuri having gone very still in the back seat. Not the stillness of someone pretending not to listen. The stillness of someone listening with their entire body. "Because you needed it," he said. Amara considered this for a moment with the gravity of someone running the answer through a more sophisticated filter than the surface of the words. "That's not the whole reason," she said. 10 years old. Kang Jae had dealt with syndicate lawyers, international negotiators, men who had spent decades learning to read rooms and extract information from partial truths. He had never been as efficiently seen through as he was being seen through right now by a child in a dark blue coat. "No," he said. "It's not." Zuri's hand on Amara's knee tightened slightly. He saw it in the mirror. She did not speak. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The safe house was in Mapo, a district west of the Han River, in a building that presented as a mid-range commercial property from the outside and was something considerably more fortified on the inside. Kang Jae had maintained it for 7 years as a location with no documented connection to the Crimson Tiger Syndicate, paid through 4 layers of shell arrangement, staffed only when needed. It had a medical room on the lower level, which was where he went first. The bullet had lodged in the posterior deltoid, clean enough that the extraction was painful and thorough, but not complicated. The syndicate's house physician, a small, efficient woman named Dr. Shin, who had been working for the organization for 11 years and asked no questions about how injuries were acquired, handled it in 40 minutes while Kang Jae sat on the medical table and did not make noise about it, which was the agreement they had established over multiple previous encounters. When she finished and he was standing again, left arm in a sling he would remove in approximately 2 hours, regardless of her recommendation, Do-yoon was waiting in the corridor. Park Do-yoon was 53 years old and had the physical presence of a man who had once been considerably more dangerous with his hands than he was now, the kind of residual capability that sat in his frame like furniture in a room where it no longer functioned but was too heavy to move. He had been with Kang Jae since the early years, before the syndicate had fully consolidated under the current structure, and there was between them the kind of familiarity that was specific to men who had been through serious events together. "The attack was coordinated," Do-yoon said without preamble. "The shooter in the mezzanine was a contractor, Lithuanian. His equipment was sourced through a procurement network we've seen twice before." "The Vega cartel," Kang Jae said. "That's the connection. The men on the ground were local, hired recently, which is why we didn't have them flagged. But the orchestration had Vega's signature, the timing, the use of the media event as cover, the targeting priority. Amara was the primary target." "Yes." Do-yoon's voice did not change register when he said this. He was reporting facts because facts were his function in moments like this one. "Not Zuri. Not you. The child." Kang Jae stood with that for a moment. The Vega cartel had been the international organization behind the conspiracy that had dismantled his marriage. He had known this for 4 years, had identified them through a process of elimination and investigation that had consumed significant syndicate resources. But the evidence that they had fabricated the documents used against Zuri had been circumstantial until 18 months ago, when a Vega operative in custody in Hong Kong had provided details that turned circumstantial into conclusive. What he had not understood was why they were moving against Amara, a child who, as far as anyone outside this car ride was concerned, was simply the daughter of a billionaire CEO making a business investment in Seoul. "They know," Kang Jae said. "They know she's yours," Do-yoon confirmed, "which means they've known for longer than we have, and they've been watching. The investment announcement brought Zuri into Korean territory. That made the child accessible in a way she hasn't been in London. They want leverage, or they want to eliminate a future claim on the syndicate's structure. If the girl is yours, she has standing. If something happened to consolidate your assets and holdings into legitimate structures," Do-yoon paused. "Vega has been interested in the legitimization process for 2 years. A child with inheritance standing could complicate their long-term plans considerably." Kang Jae looked at the corridor wall. His shoulder was making itself known again despite the anesthetic. He ignored it. "Where is she now?" "The upper room, with the child." A brief pause. "She's been asking questions." "About what?" "About the building, the security arrangements, the number of exits. She also asked one of the staff whether this location was registered under your name." He almost smiled. He didn't. "And Amara?" "Eating," Do-yoon said. "The kitchen staff offered her food and she accepted. She's been asking the staff questions also, but her questions are different." "Different how?" Do-yoon looked at him with an expression that was difficult to categorize. "She's been asking about you, Mom." He found Zuri on the upper floor in the room that faced east, standing at the window with her arms crossed and her back to the door. She had changed out of the burgundy coat into something one of the staff had found for her, a plain dark sweater, slightly too large in the shoulders. She looked, in that moment, less like the billion-dollar CEO who had walked through the arrivals terminal, and more like the woman who used to stand at the window of their apartment and look at Seoul at night when she couldn't sleep, which she had done more often than she had ever told him, and which he had known about anyway, because he was a light sleeper and the absence of warmth beside him woke him reliably. He did not say any of that. He came into the room and stood in the approximate center of it and waited. She turned around. Her face had the composed quality that was her default under pressure, the thing he had always thought of as her armor. Not cold, not closed, but arranged, in control of itself. "How's the shoulder?" she said. "Handled." "Good." She looked at him for a moment. "Sit down. You look like you're about to perform for an audience, and there's no audience." He sat. There was a chair near the window. He took it. She remained standing, which he suspected was intentional. "You need to tell me," she said, "what is actually happening, not a version of it. Not the operational summary you'd give someone who needs to know enough to follow instructions. The actual thing. There's a cartel called Vega, international organization based primarily out of Eastern Europe with significant operations in Southeast Asia. They have an interest in Korean organized crime networks, specifically in the Crimson Tiger Syndicate. They targeted you at the airport today. Their primary target was Amara." Something moved through her face. Fast, controlled, but he saw it. "Why Amara?" "Because she's mine." The room was quiet. Outside the window, the city made its ambient noise, traffic, distant construction, the indefinite sound of 1,000,000 people conducting their lives at a remove. "You know," she said. Her voice was flat, not accusing, flat in the way of someone verifying a fact they had already arrived at. "Do-yoon identified you 6 hours ago, verified the records this morning, and before this morning. I didn't know about Amara," he said. "I found the note. After you left, I found the bracelet and the note, and I searched for you for 4 years. I couldn't find you." She looked at him. "You searched for me?" "Yes." "For 4 years?" "Yes." "And then you stopped." He held her eyes. "I stopped because you didn't want to be found, because you had been thorough about making that clear. And because I had exiled you without explanation, and I did not have the right to override your decision to stay gone." Something flickered in her expression, not softness, the opposite of softness, a kind of precision coming into focus, the look of someone who is recalibrating and not comfortably. You didn't explain, she said. You never explained. You sat in that room and you told me our marriage was dissolved and you looked me in the face and you gave me nothing. I know. Don't do that. Don't say I know like it's a complete answer. Tell me why. Right now, 10 years later, in whatever this building is, with a bullet wound in your shoulder and my daughter downstairs, tell me why you did it the way you did it. He told her. He told her about the documents, the Cho Alliance, the Vega cartel's manufactured evidence. He told her what the documentation had claimed about her, the fabricated intelligence connections, the payment records, the constructed biography. He told her that he had believed it because it had been designed to be believed by a man who made decisions on evidence, and that it had been presented to him by someone he trusted completely, and that the decision he had made had felt, at the time, like the only decision that kept her alive. He did not tell her that he had sat in the study for 40 minutes holding the bracelet. He did not tell her about the photograph in the wallet. Those were not facts she had asked for, and this was not a conversation about his grief. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Who brought you the documents? She said. Do-yun. Another silence, different quality from the previous one. Do-yun, she said again. Not a question this time. He's been my consigliere for 12 years. He's the person I trust most in the... Where is he now? Kang Jae stopped. The sentence he had been forming dissolved. He looked at her, at the particular alertness that had come into her posture, the way her arms had uncrossed and dropped to her sides in the specific configuration of someone who had arrived at a conclusion and was waiting for the other person in the room to arrive at the same place. He's in the building, Kang Jae said slowly. The cartel knew where we were going. We came here directly from the airport, and no one outside this car had the destination except Do-yun chose this location, Kang Jae said. I called him from the terminal. I told him we were going to the safe house, and he confirmed the... He was standing before he finished the sentence. His shoulder sent a white-hot objection through his entire left side, and he ignored it completely. He crossed to the door. The corridor outside was empty. That was wrong. There should have been 2 of his men in the corridor. He had positioned them before coming upstairs. The corridor was empty, and the particular silence coming from the lower level of the building was not the silence of a space where people were conducting normal operations. It was the silence of a space where something had changed. Kang Jae looked back at Zuri. She was already at the window, looking down at the building's exterior with the fast, functional assessment of someone who had spent a decade running a global enterprise and understood that the difference between a viable situation and a catastrophic one was sometimes 30 seconds of accurate information. There's a vehicle outside that wasn't there when we arrived, she said. Black, running. Kang Jae moved back into the room. He crossed to her and looked past her shoulder at the street below. The vehicle was a panel van, positioned at the building's secondary entrance. Engine running, the driver visible through the windshield as a shape rather than a face. Amara, Zuri said. Her voice did not break. It sharpened. He was already moving toward the door when they heard the sound from downstairs. Not a gunshot, not an explosion, but something quieter, and in some ways more alarming. The particular sound of a struggle being... The sound lasted approximately 4 seconds. The specific compression of it, something heavy against a wall, the involuntary exhalation of a body absorbing impact, then silence with a different texture than the silence before it, was enough for Kang Jae to reconstruct what had happened to his man downstairs without needing to see it. He was through the door and moving down the corridor before Zuri had finished turning from the window. She was right behind him. He did not tell her to stay. He had enough functional understanding of who she had become to know that telling her to stay would cost him 3 seconds he did not have, and he needed those 3 seconds for something else. The stairwell was clear. He took it fast, right hand on the wall, left arm held against his body with the deliberate rigidity of someone managing pain through structural control. The medical room door at the bottom of the stairs was open. He could see Dr. Shin through the gap, sitting against the far wall, hands zip-tied in front of her, a cut on her temple that had just started bleeding. Alive. Conscious. She met his eyes and moved hers deliberately to the left, toward the kitchen corridor. He held up one finger. She blinked once. One person, or one that she could confirm. He moved past the medical room. The kitchen corridor was narrow, institutional, the kind of passage that existed for staff movement rather than aesthetics. The overhead light was working, but the far end was darker than it should have been. One of the panels out, recently, because it had been functioning when they arrived. The kitchen itself was empty. The food that had been set out for Amara was still on the counter. A half-eaten piece of bread on a plate. A glass of water with her fingerprints on it. The chair she had been sitting in was pushed back at an angle that suggested she had stood up quickly rather than deliberately. Not there. Kang Jae stood in the kitchen for exactly 2 seconds, processing. Then he heard it, from the service entrance at the building's rear, which connected to a narrow alley that ran parallel to the main street, and which he had not told anyone about except Do-yoon. A voice. Low. Speaking Korean with the particular cadence of someone giving instructions rather than having a conversation. Do-yoon's voice. He moved to the service entrance door and stopped with his hand on the handle. Behind him, Zuri had entered the kitchen. He could hear her breathing, fast but controlled, the breathing of someone running their body on emergency fuel with full conscious awareness of the situation. He turned his head just enough to see her. She had picked up something from the kitchen counter, a short, heavy-handled knife, the kind used for breaking down vegetables, nothing tactical about it, but she was holding it with the grip of someone who had decided it was better than nothing and was correct. He held up his hand. Wait, she held. He opened the door. The alley was narrow and poorly lit, the morning light not reaching its floor properly because of the building heights on either side. Do-yoon was standing 8 feet away with his back partially to the door, and he was not alone. 2 men flanked him, not syndicate personnel, not anyone Kang Jae recognized. They had the specific physical profile of contractors, the same category of professional as the men at the airport. One of them had his hand on Amara's shoulder. She was standing very straight. Her face was the careful blankness of a child who had decided that whatever she was feeling was not going to be visible to the people causing it. Her eyes found Kang Jae the moment the door opened, and what moved through them was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated, more conditional. Recognition. The same recognition from the terminal, from the car, from the 10-year-old who had noted that he had moved to cover her specifically, and had correctly identified that the reason was not simple. Do-yoon turned. His face underwent a rapid sequence of expressions that he controlled almost immediately, returning to the neutral professional register that Kang Jae had known for 12 years. Almost immediately. Not quite. Kang Jae, he said. Let the girl go, Kang Jae said. This is not. Do-yoon stopped. Started again. I need you to understand the position you're in. The cartel has 3 teams in the city. This building's location was transmitted 40 minutes ago. The window for getting you and the woman out safely is closing, and the only way I can negotiate that window is if I have something to offer them. You're going to offer them a 10-year-old child. I'm going to use her as a mechanism to get you to a conversation. A sit-down. You, the cartel's representative, a negotiated arrangement that keeps the syndicate intact and ends the targeting. That's what I'm trying to build here. Kang Jae looked at him. He had known this man for 12 years. He had sat across from him in the study at 3 in the morning. He had relied on his judgment in 17 situations that required absolute trust. He looked at him now the way you looked at a familiar room after something had been moved. All the same elements, different geometry. You brought me the documents, Kang Jae said, 10 years ago, the evidence against Zuri. Do-yoon's jaw tightened by a fraction. You manufactured them, Kang Jae said, or you facilitated their manufacture. You brought them to me and you presented them as intelligence and you watched me make the decision you needed me to make. The situation was more complex than, did you make the documents? A silence. 3 seconds. 4. Yes, Do-yoon said. The alley absorbed the word. Kang Jae stood with it the way you stood with something that your body had already known before your mind caught up. The confirmation arriving not as shock, but as the physical settling of a weight that had been suspended for a long time. Behind him, he heard Zuri's breath catch. One sharp, involuntary sound. Then nothing. Why? Kang Jae said. Because she was the vulnerability. Do-yoon's voice had shifted. The professional neutrality was still there, but something had come through underneath it. Not remorse, not precisely. Something more like the exhaustion of a man who had been maintaining a position for a long time and had just been relieved of the requirement to maintain it. An outsider. No family ties to the network, no political leverage, no understanding of how the architecture worked. You were building something that could last generations, and you were building it on top of a foundation that had a crack in it. I removed the crack. She was my wife. She was a liability with access to the innermost operations of the Crimson Tiger Syndicate, and you were too compromised by your personal attachment to see it clearly. She was never an operative. You knew that. I knew she wasn't then. I couldn't know what she might become, what she might be persuaded to become, what someone might offer her. He paused. I was protecting the syndicate. That has always been my function. Your function, Kang Jae said, and his voice had gone to a register he rarely used, something very low and very flat, was to advise me, not to make decisions for me, not to destroy my family based on what you imagined might happen. Your family was a weakness. My family was mine. The contractor with his hand on Amar's shoulder tightened his grip slightly. She did not flinch. She was still looking at Kang Jae with those steady, complicated eyes, and he realized that she was listening to every word of this conversation with the full processing capacity of a 10-year-old who had been raised by a woman who treated her like an intelligent person and had not been wrong to do so. She was understanding what was being said. Not all of it. Enough. The cartel, Kang Jae said to Do-yoon. How long? How long what? How long have you been working with Vega? The alley was quiet. A distant sound. Traffic from the main street, the city conducting its business at a remove. 7 years, Do-yoon said. 7 years. Kang Jae ran the arithmetic without wanting to. 7 years meant Do-yoon had been feeding Vega information about the syndicate for 7 of the 12 years they had worked together. It meant every strategic decision made in that period had been made in a room where one of the participants was transmitting the outcome to an external party. It meant the legitimization process, the years of work converting syndicate operations into documented, defensible businesses, had been monitored by an organization with a direct interest in preventing it. They approached you, Kang Jae said. I approached them. Do-yoon said it without hesitation, with something that was almost pride. The syndicate was changing direction. You were moving it away from what it was built to be. The international connections, the legitimate structures. I watched you spend a decade building something that was going to dissolve everything the organization stood for. I needed counterweight. You needed to sell us out. I needed to ensure that something survived your idealism. Kang Jae looked at him for a long moment. The man who had sat across from him in the study at 3 a.m, advising him on everything from financial strategy to the specific wording of ultimatums delivered to rival factions. The man who had confirmed the safe house location this morning. The man who had, in all probability, been feeding Vega's targeting team's information since Apex Horizon's Soul investment was announced. Step away from the child, Kang Jae said to the contractor. That's not... Do-yoon started. I'm not talking to you. The contractor looked at Do-yoon, a brief exchange of eye contact. The contractor did not move. Kang Jae took 2 steps forward. His left arm was still held against his body. The distance between himself and the contractor was approximately 5 feet. The distance between himself and Do-yoon was 7. You're going to get yourself killed, Do-yoon said. You're shot. You don't have a weapon. There are 2 of them. I'm aware of what there are. Kang Jae, I'm going to ask you one more time to have your man step away from my daughter. The word landed in the alley with its full weight. Do-yoon's expression shifted, something registering behind the professional composure. Something that might have been surprise and might have been understanding, the specific recalibration of a man who had built his strategy around a set of assumptions and had just discovered one of them was wrong. He had not known, Kang Jae realized. Do-yoon had identified Amara as a leverage point, as the child of a billionaire CEO, as a mechanism for controlling the situation. But he had not known the full connection. The Vega cartel knew. Do-yoon had been working with Vega for 7 years, and Vega had known about Amara's parentage. But somewhere in the architecture of that arrangement, the specific detail had not been transmitted in a direction that reached Do-yoon's full comprehension until this moment, which meant Do-yoon had been operating with incomplete information, managed by the cartel, used as a conduit while being kept partially blind, which was how you handled an asset you didn't fully trust. You gave them enough to be useful and kept back enough to maintain control. Do-yoon had spent 7 years believing he was partnering with Vega. He had been their instrument. Kang-jae watched this understanding move through the older man's face. It took approximately 4 seconds. When it finished, something had changed in Do-yoon's expression. Not guilt, not exactly, but the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that the bargain he made was different from the one he thought he was making, and that the difference is not in his favor. The contractor's grip on Amar's shoulder loosened by a fraction, involuntary response to his principal's sudden uncertainty. That fraction was enough. Amara moved. She dropped her weight, pulled her shoulder down and forward in a motion that was not trained. It was instinctive, the motion of a child who had grown up watching her mother handle situations where grace under pressure was not optional. And she came out from under the contractor's hand, and she ran. Not toward Kang-jae, toward the door behind him, toward her mother. The contractor reached for her. Kang-jae was already inside the reach. He hit the man with his right side, his functional side, driving his shoulder into the contractor's chest and using his own momentum to take them both into the alley wall. The impact sent a white concussive report up through his damaged left shoulder that he would have difficulty describing later except as total, and he made no sound about it. And he kept the contractor against the wall with his right forearm across the man's throat, while the man's hands worked at his arm with the systematic efficiency of someone trained to break that kind of hold. From his left peripheral, he caught the second contractor moving. He could not cover 2 directions with one functional arm. He was aware of this with the clean, unemotional clarity of someone doing damage assessment in real time. He could hold the first contractor against the wall, or he could address the second. He could not do both. Then the second contractor made a sound that was sudden and involuntary and sat down against the opposite wall of the alley with his knees drawn up and both hands going to his right side. Zuri was standing 2 feet behind where he had been. The kitchen knife was in her right hand. She had not used the blade. She had used the handle, driving it into the pressure point below the man's floating ribs with the kind of deliberate, targeted force that was not luck. She looked at Kang-jae across the alley. "I told you," she said, slightly out of breath. "I've been managing hostile situations for 10 years. The contractor against the wall stopped working at Kang-jae's forearm. The man was making a conscious calculation. The math of the situation. 2 principals incapacitated, one of them a woman who had just demonstrated she was not a bystander, and the calculation was coming out in a direction that favored compliance over continuation. Kang-jae stepped back. The contractor stayed against the wall. Do-yoon had not moved during any of this. He was standing in the same position he had occupied throughout the confrontation, and his face had undergone a further change in the intervening seconds, the settling that came after the recalibration had completed. He looked, Kang-jae thought, older than he had in the study at 3 in the morning. Older than 12 years of memory. "They'll come for you," Do-yoon said. His voice was quieter now. The operational register was gone. The 3 teams in the city. This was the soft option. What they send next won't be. "I know," Kang-jae said. "You can't fight Vega with what you have. Half the syndicate's operational network has been compromised through my access. Your safe locations, your external contacts, your financial channels, they have maps of all of it. I know that too." "Then you know you can't win this." Kang-jae looked at him for a moment. At the man who had fabricated evidence, destroyed a marriage, facilitated 10 years of separation from a child he had never known existed, and spent 7 years feeding the organization's architecture to an international criminal cartel. All of it, every piece of it, in service of a vision of the syndicate's future that Do-yoon had decided was more valid than the actual leaders. "I'm not going to fight Vega with what I have," Kang-jae said. "I'm going to fight them with what she has." He did not look at Zuri when he said it. He did not need to. He could feel the quality of her attention from 8 feet away, that focused, processing stillness that meant she was already 3 steps ahead of the statement, already running the implications. "Apex Horizon," she said. "You built a billion-dollar intelligence infrastructure to run a global investment empire. Corporate analysts, data networks, international legal teams, government relationships in 6 countries. Vega has been operating in the dark against the syndicate. They have no map of your organization because they never needed one. You want to use my company as a weapon. I want to propose a partnership," he said. "On your terms." The alley was quiet. Amara was in the doorway behind him. He could hear her breathing, that fast but controlled rhythm that she had apparently inherited along with his jawline. Zuri was looking at him with the expression he had seen in the car, on the road from the airport. The dangerous, unresolved uncertainty of a woman who was revising her assumptions in real time and had not yet decided where the revision was going to land. "My terms," she said. "Your terms." "Then my first term," Zuri said, "is that you tell me everything. Not the operational summary, not the version that protects your position. Everything from the beginning with nothing held back. Every decision, every piece of information, every moment in the last 10 years where you made a choice that affected me or my daughter." She paused. Our daughter. It was the first time she had said it that way. The acknowledgement of it, the two-word structural fact of what Mara was in relation to both of them, landed with a weight that no other statement in the conversation had carried. "Yes," he said. From the doorway, Amara said quietly, and with the directness that appeared to be her fundamental mode of engaging with the world, "Is someone going to tell me what's actually happening?" Kang-jae and Zuri looked at each other across the alley. In 10 years, they had not been in the same space long enough to share a look that required interpretation. This one was brief and complicated and carried, in its few seconds, the accumulated weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. The photograph in the wallet, the note with 3 sentences, the bracelet in the desk drawer, and a decade of 2 people building separate empires from the wreckage of one destroyed night. "Yes," Zuri said to her daughter, "come inside." But as Amara moved through the door and Zuri turned to follow, one of Kang-jae's men appeared at the alley entrance from the street side, moving fast, phone in hand, face carrying the specific expression of someone delivering information that has just changed the nature of the man coming through the alley entrance was Kang-jae's second plainclothes operative, the one who had been unmarked at the airport, and his face was carrying information that had no good version. "3 vehicles," he said, 2 blocks north, moving slow. They're not rushing because they don't think they need to." Kang-jae looked at the alley's dimensions. 1 entrance from the street, 1 exit through the building's service door. The building itself had 2 floors and 4 windows on the alley side, none of them viable as escape routes without equipment they didn't have. "How long?" Kang-jae said. 4 minutes, maybe 5 if the intersection traffic holds them. 4 minutes. He ran the arithmetic. His operational strength in the building was 2 men, one of whom had a head wound from the terminal. Zuri's security operative was inside somewhere. He had lost track of him during the alley confrontation. The 2 Vega contractors were neutralized but not secured. Do-yoon was standing 6 feet away and had just confirmed that the syndicate's entire operational network had been mapped and compromised. 4 minutes was not enough time to fight. It was barely enough time to move. "The building has a sublevel," Kang-jae said to his operative. "Maintenance access. It connects to the utility corridor under the block. Get it open." "I don't have the—" "Break it open." The man went. Kang-jae turned to Do-yoon. The older man had not moved. He was standing in the alley with the stillness of someone who had run out of positions to take, all the options exhausted, the board reduced to its final configuration. "The Vega representative in Seoul," Kang-jae said. "Name." Do-yoon looked at him. "You've been their asset for 7 years. You know who runs their Korean operations. Give me the name." "Giving you that name doesn't help you in the next 4 minutes. It helps me in the 4 minutes after that." "Name." A pause. Do-yoon's jaw worked slightly. The expression on his face was not readable as any single thing. It was the composite expression of a man processing the full weight of what he had built and what it had cost and what it was going to cost further, and finding the arithmetic neither clean nor comfortable. "Seo Wan-gi," Do-yoon said. "He runs a legitimate import firm in Yoido, 4th floor. The firm is called Baco Trading. How many personnel?" "At the location, 6 to 8. The 3 teams in the city operate separately. Wan-gi coordinates but doesn't direct field operations personally." "Is Amara's value to them leverage or elimination?" Do-yoon hesitated. "1 second. Leverage. They want the syndicate's legitimization assets. A child with inheritance standing gives them a legal instrument if something happens to you. They want her alive and controlled." "That's the only useful thing you've said in 12 years, Kang-jae said, and he walked back through the service door. The sublevel maintenance corridor was low-ceilinged and smelled like standing water and old concrete, lit by a single line of emergency lighting that cast everything in a dim amber that made distances hard to judge. Kang Jae moved through it with Zuri beside him and Amara between them, the girl's hand in her mother's, the sound of their footsteps absorbed by the narrow space. Behind them, his two operatives, Zuri's security man, who had materialized from the building's interior with a cut on his forearm and his weapon still functional, and at the rear, Do-yun. Kang Jae had made the calculation on Do-yun quickly and without sentiment. The man was compromised, but he was also the only person present who had a complete picture of the syndicate's exposed operational network, and that knowledge had value. He brought Do-yun because leaving him in the alley for Vega's teams to collect was the same as handing them a detailed briefing document. He kept him at the back. The corridor ran for approximately 60 meters before branching. Kang Jae took the right branch without hesitating. He had studied the building's infrastructure plans 3 years ago when he acquired the property, the same way he studied infrastructure plans for any location that functioned as a safe house. Because the difference between a safe house and a trap was often a question of how many exits you had memorized. The right branch ended at a steel door that opened into the basement level of a commercial laundry operation that occupied the ground floor of the adjacent building. The laundry ran 6 days a week and was currently operating. The sound of industrial machines came through the walls as a constant low vibration, and the air was warm and humid in a way that was almost shocking after the cold concrete of the corridor. A man looked up from a sorting table when they came through the door. Middle-aged, wearing an apron, the expression of someone whose morning had not previously contained a group of people emerging from a wall access panel. Kang Jae said, in Korean, "I need the rear exit, and I need you to not have seen us." He placed 3 folded bills on the sorting table. The man looked at the bills, looked at the group, at Zuri and Amara specifically, then at the blood on Kang Jae's coat, then back at the bills. He pointed to the left without a word and went back to sorting. They came out onto a side street 2 blocks from the safe house. The Vega vehicles would be at the building by now, which meant they had perhaps 8 minutes before the teams realized the building was empty and began expanding their search radius. 8 minutes in a city the size of Seoul was not a comfortable margin, but it was a margin. Zuri had her phone. Kang Jae had his. He used his to call a number that was not in his contacts, but that he had memorized the way he memorized things that mattered, by using them, by returning to them, by making them part of his operational architecture. The call connected on the second ring. "I need a vehicle and a location," he said. "Clean, nothing registered to the syndicate or any shell within 3 layers of it." The voice on the other end asked no questions. Gave him an address in Seongdong district and a time. 22 minutes. He ended the call, looked at Zuri. She was on her own phone, speaking in English, low and fast, and he caught enough of it to reconstruct the conversation. She was talking to someone inside Apex Horizon's infrastructure, her corporate security director from the controlled terminology, and what she was transmitting was a name. Baeko Trading, Yeouido, Seo Won-gi, and a set of instructions he couldn't fully hear but which involved the phrases financial exposure, document access, and 45 minutes. She ended her call and looked at him. "My team is faster than yours," she said. It was not a boast, it was information. "I know," he said. "Won-gi's firm has been processing Vega's Korean financial flows for 4 years. My analysts have been tracking an irregularity in the infrastructure investment data for 6 weeks. I didn't know what it was connected to until 30 seconds ago." She paused. "I can have a complete financial map of his operation in under an hour. Account structures, asset holdings, communication records, everything Vega has run through his firm. That's not what we need right now," he said. "Right now I need to get Amara somewhere that Vega's 3 city teams can't reach." Where? He had been thinking about this since the alley. The syndicate's safe locations were compromised. Do-yun had confirmed it, and the attack on the Mapo building had demonstrated it. His own mansion was the most defensible location he controlled, but it was also the first place Vega would move on once they understood the smaller options had failed. Hotel was out, civilian exposure. Any location within the syndicate's documented network was out. "Your hotel," he said. She looked at him. "The Apex Horizon Advance team booked your accommodation before the arrival. Vega knew you were coming, but they moved on the airport because they needed to act before you were in a secured location. If your hotel booking was handled through your corporate infrastructure and not through any channel connected to the syndicate, it's clean. They don't have the reservation data. It was handled through my London office, she said. Completely separate architecture. Then it's the safest place in Seoul right now. Amara, who had been walking between them and listening to this exchange with the focused quiet of a child who had understood some time ago that her participation in this conversation should be primarily through her ears, said, "What's the plan after the hotel?" Kang Jae looked down at her. She looked up at him. The morning light was coming in from the east end of the street, and it caught the angle of her face in a way that produced again that particular recognition, the jaw, the set of the eyes, that he still hadn't found a way to absorb. "We take apart the cartel's operation from the inside," he said, "financially and structurally, before they can regroup from losing us at the safe house." "That's the plan?" "The beginning of it." Amara considered this. "What do you need to make it work?" "Evidence, complete documentation of Vega's Korean operations, their relationship with Do-yoon, their involvement in what happened 10 years ago, enough to give to the right authorities in a form they can act on." "Mom can get that," Amara said, with the simple certainty of someone stating a fact about the weather. "I know," Kang Jae said. Amara looked at her mother, then back at him. Then she looked straight ahead and kept walking and said nothing further, which was, he was beginning to understand, her mode of indicating that she had reached a conclusion she was not yet ready to share. Satsam. The vehicle was a gray SUV parked in a loading zone in Seongdong, keys in the magnetic box under the rear bumper, the interior clean and empty of anything identifying. Kang Jae put Amara and Zuri in the back, his operative with the head wound in the passenger seat, and drove himself, because his left arm was in a sling and driving one-handed was functional, and he needed the front seat for the conversation that was about to happen. He drove for 6 minutes before he said anything. "Do-yoon." In the rear-facing third row, Do-yoon said, "Yes." "Wongi knows you've been taken. The teams at the building will report back when they find it empty. He'll assume you're either dead or turned." "I know." "Which means your value to him as an asset is finished. He has no reason to protect you." "I know that also." "What does he have on you? Documentation? Recordings? Financial records? What exists that can be used against you in a formal proceeding?" A pause. The SUV moved through Seongdong's mid-morning traffic, the city indifferent around them. Payment records through a third-party structure in Singapore, 11 transactions over 7 years, communication logs that he controls server access to. Another pause. "A recorded briefing from 4 years ago where I provided detailed information on the syndicate's transitional financial structure." "He'll use it," Kang Jae said. "When this collapses, his first move will be to surface that material and put everything on you. Minimize his own exposure by maximizing yours." "I'm aware of what he'll do." "Then you understand that your only viable position is to give us everything you have before he can act. Communication records on your end. Any documentation you retained. Names of syndicate personnel who were compromised through your access. Everything." From the back seat, Zuri's voice. "And the original operation, 10 years ago. I want documentation of what was done, the fabricated evidence, the coordination with Vega, the specific decisions made. All of it." Do-yoon was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of something that had been held under pressure for a long time and had finally found the release point. "Yes," he said, "I can provide all of it." Zuri made no sound in response. Kang Jae did not look in the mirror. He kept his eyes on the road and his right hand on the wheel, and he absorbed the word, yes, the way he had absorbed the bullet in his shoulder, as a physical impact with delayed consequences, the full weight of it, something he would deal with when the immediate situation permitted. The hotel was in Gangnam, a building whose lobby communicated international corporate comfort, and whose security infrastructure, as Kang Jae discovered when they arrived, was considerably more serious than its aesthetic suggested. Zuri's advanced team had been thorough. The accommodation occupied an entire floor, with multiple room options and a private elevator that required biometric clearance to operate. The advanced team members, 3 of them, were present and visibly relieved to see their employer alive. Amara walked off the elevator with the same unhurried composure she had walked through the arrivals terminal with, looked at the space, and said to her mother, "I want to change my clothes." "I know," Zuri said, "and then I want to be part of the conversation." "Amara, I know what's happening. I've known since the alley. Keeping me in a separate room doesn't change what I know. It just means I'm not in the room where the decisions are being made." She looked at her mother with the directness that was apparently structural in her character. "I'm 10, not 4. A silence. Zuri looked at her daughter. The expression on her face was complicated in the specific way of a parent confronting the fact that the child they raised has become, in some important respect, exactly what they intended, which was both the goal and the most disorienting experience parenthood produced. "Change your clothes," Zuri said. "Then you can sit in the room." Amara went. Kang Jae watched this exchange from the corridor. His shoulder had moved past the stage of insistent complaint into the stage of deep, structural ache, the kind that settled into the bone and stayed there, that no position could relieve, that was simply the body's invoice for the morning's activities. Zuri turned and looked at him. They were alone in the corridor for the first time since the study at the Mapo building. The hotel's ambient sound, climate control, distant elevator machinery, created a white noise that gave the space a quality of privacy that the previous hours had not offered. "You need to have that wound looked at again," she said. "Later. Now, you're compensating in your gait, and your left hand has been losing color for the last 40 minutes. She said it the way she said everything, not asking, not suggesting, stating, "Sit down somewhere and let someone look at it. When the situation is stable." "The situation is stable enough for 10 minutes. She paused. "I'm not asking you." He sat down. She found the hotel's first aid kit through one of the advanced team members, and she came back and she looked at the wound. The operative's work was intact, but the activity of the morning had stressed the closure. With the focused, unsent mental attention of someone who had dealt with physical emergencies before and did not need to perform concern in order to feel it. She worked in silence for a moment. Then, "When Amara was born," she said, "I was in a hospital in London, 3 in the morning. I had one friend with me, a woman I'd met 3 months after arriving, someone who knew nothing about where I came from or what I'd left. She held my hand." A pause. The work continued. "I didn't say your name. I'd decided before I went into labor that I wasn't going to say it, that she was going to come into the world without your name being the first thing in the room." He did not speak. "But I thought it," she said. "I thought it the entire time, which I've been angry about for 10 years because it felt like a concession I hadn't chosen to make." "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you are." She finished what she was doing and looked at him, not with softness, because softness was not where they were, but with something that was beginning to organize itself in a direction that was not closed. Sorry doesn't rebuild 10 years. It doesn't give Amara back the father she didn't have. It doesn't give me back the years I spent building something from nothing in a country where I knew no one, with a child and no support structure and a name that wasn't mine. She paused. "But I'm not interested in the sorry being performative. I'm interested in what comes after it." "So am I," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she stood up. "My team will have the Baeko financial map within the hour," she said. "When it's ready, we'll need to move on Wangi's location before he can sanitize his records. That means tonight." "Agreed." "I'll run the intelligence operation. Your people handle the physical approach." "Agreed." "And Kang Jae." She stopped at the corridor entrance, turned back. "If we do this, if we go at Vega tonight, and we pull this apart and we survive it, what comes after has to be built on honesty, complete honesty. Not operational information sharing, not tactical updates, everything." "Yes," he said. She held his eyes for 3 seconds. Then she went into the room where her team was assembling the financial map that was going to dismantle an international cartel's Korean operations. But the Baeko Trading Building was a glass and steel commercial structure in Yoido's financial district, indistinguishable from its neighbors, which was precisely the point. It was 9:17 in the evening when Kang Jae stood in a parking structure 2 blocks away and looked at the building's 4th-floor windows, where the lights were still on. Wangi was there. Zuri's financial team had confirmed it 20 minutes ago through phone traffic analysis. He was running damage control, pulling records, trying to build a defensive position before the collapse reached him. He had not yet understood the shape of what was coming. The financial map had taken 58 minutes. It was comprehensive. 4 years of Vega's Korean financial operations, the full scope of Do Yoon's involvement, the communication structure between Won-gi and the international cartel leadership, the manufactured evidence from 10 years ago traced through its forensic accounting trail to a specific payment made to a document fabrication network in Busan. Everything. Time-stamped, cross-referenced, formatted in a way that 3 separate legal teams in 3 separate countries could act on simultaneously. Zuri's corporate security director, a former Interpol investigator named James Osai, no relation, a compact British Ghanaian man whose professional composure matched her own, had already transmitted a preliminary package to a government financial crimes unit whose director was a former classmate of one of Apex Horizon's board members. That channel would take 12 hours to activate formally, but the package was in official hands. What happened in the next 4 hours would determine whether Won-gi and the Vega network had time to realize it. Kang Jae had 6 men from the syndicate's most trusted internal unit, men whose loyalty ran to him personally rather than to the syndicate's institutional structure, and who therefore fell outside the network that Do Yoon had mapped for Vega. They were positioned at 2 entrances and in the parking structure adjacent to the building. His phone vibrated. Zuri. 4th floor has 7 people, she said. Won-gi, 4 of his staff, and 2 individuals who arrived 40 minutes ago and don't match any business registration on file for the firm. Almost certainly Vega security. Armed? Assume yes. Your team is in position? James has people at the building's communication infrastructure. When you go in, they'll cut external transmission capability. Won-gi won't be able to push anything out. If he has a local backup drive, James will handle the server room on the 2nd floor simultaneously. A pause. This is what we do, Kang Jae. You protect people with force. I dismantle them with information. Let me do what I'm good at. He looked at the building's lit 4th floor. Somewhere up there was the man who had coordinated the airport attack, who had sent contractors to take his daughter, who had spent years operating in the infrastructure of the Crimson Tiger Syndicate through a man Kang Jae had trusted with his life. There's something you need to know before we go in, he said. What? Do Yoon gave me Won-gi's name. He gave me the full financial disclosure. He's been cooperative. He paused. But there's one thing he told me privately, in the vehicle, that I haven't shared with the full group. Tell me, Won-gi has a contingency. If his operation is compromised, if he determines that the exposure is terminal, he has authorization from Vega's central leadership to take Amara, not as leverage anymore, as a message. He kept his voice level. They don't believe a man like me will continue dismantling an empire if his family is under active threat. The message isn't about the child. It's about demonstrating that they can reach her anywhere, anytime, and that the cost of continuing is permanent. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. Where is she now? Zuri said, and her voice had changed. Not to panic. Zuri Okoye did not panic, but to a register he had not heard from her before. Something stripped entirely of the composed professional surface. Something that was purely the voice of a mother running the calculation of threat to her child. She's at the hotel. James has 2 people on the floor. The elevator is biometric. He paused. She's safe. Right now, she is safe. But the contingency gets activated the moment Won-gi determines his position is terminal. Which is the moment we move on the building. Yes. Another silence. Then we move fast, she said. Fast enough that he doesn't have time to make the call. Fast enough, he said, and quiet enough that he doesn't know we're moving until we're already inside. He looked at the building, the 4th floor windows, the light burning in there while a man tried to hold together something that was already coming apart, not yet knowing that the woman who had survived being exiled from this country a decade ago had spent the last 58 minutes building the instrument of his destruction. Ready? He said. I've been ready, Zuri said, for 10 years. He signaled his men. They moved out of the parking structure and across the street and into the building's lobby and up through the service stairwell. 4 floors of concrete and the specific silence of a building that didn't know yet what was about to happen inside it. And when Kang Jae pushed through the stairwell door onto the fourth floor, the two Vega security men were already turning toward the sound, and the first one's hand was going to his weapon, and Kang Jae was moving with his good arm and the specific accumulated fury of a man who had been patient for 10 years and had... The first Vega security man went down fast. Kang Jae hit him with his right shoulder, the functional one, the only one he had left, driving all of his weight and momentum into the man's center of mass before the weapon clears the holster. And they went into the corridor wall together with a sound that was felt more than heard, the specific percussion of two bodies and a plaster wall conducting force between them. The man was larger than Kang Jae and professionally trained, and none of that mattered because Kang Jae had been moving while the man was still processing the stairwell door opening, and the half-second advantage of first motion was worth more than size in a corridor that narrow. He got the weapon. His left arm screamed at the motion required, and he made no sound about it. The second Vega man had his weapon out. He was 6 feet down the corridor, and he had the angle, and he was a professional, and a professional with the angle does not miss. Kang Jae knew this and moved anyway, not toward him but sideways into the nearest doorway, dragging the first man as a partial barrier, and the shot that came was close enough that he felt the pressure displacement against his right cheek. Then one of his men came through the stairwell door behind him and the geometry changed. It lasted 40 seconds. That was the total duration of the physical confrontation on the fourth floor of Baco Trading, 40 seconds of noise and force, and the specific violent economy of men who were not performing violence but conducting it. And when it ended, both Vega security personnel were on the floor, and Kang Jae was standing in the corridor outside the main office door with someone else's blood on his coat and his good hand holding a weapon he had not fired. His left shoulder had reopened. He could feel it, the warmth spreading through the sling, the deep structural ache graduating back into active pain. He noted it, filed it, moved. He went through the office door. Seo Won-gi was standing at his desk in the posture of a man who had heard everything and had spent the last 40 seconds making calculations about his options, and had arrived at the conclusion that his options were limited. He was 61 years old, thick-set, with the carefully maintained appearance of a legitimate businessman. A good suit, a desk covered in organized documents, the architecture of respectability assembled with the thoroughness of someone who had invested significant resources in its construction. He was holding a phone. "Put it down," Kang Jae said. "It's already sent," Won-gi said. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had managed crises before and understood that composure was its own kind of leverage. "The moment I heard the stairwell door, I sent the activation message. Your daughter is..." Kang Jae's phone vibrated in his pocket. He did not look at it. He kept his eyes on Won-gi. "Check your phone," Won-gi said. "Go ahead. I'll wait." He checked it with his right hand, weapon still on Won-gi. The message was from James Osei, Zuri's security director. 4 words. "Floor secure. Amara safe." He looked up at Won-gi. "Your activation message went to a number that my partner's team redirected 40 minutes ago," Kang Jae said. "Her communications infrastructure is considerably more sophisticated than yours. The 2 men you had positioned near the hotel were detained by Seoul Metropolitan Police 7 minutes ago on an anonymous tip that included photographic evidence of weapons violations." He paused. The tip was filed by a paralegal working for an Apex Horizon subsidiary whose office is 12 minutes from the hotel. Won-gi's composure underwent a visible adjustment. Not collapse, he was too practiced for collapse, but recalibration, the expression of a man revising his understanding of the room he was in. "Sit down," Kang Jae said. Won-gi sat. "The financial documentation your firm has been processing for Vega's Korean operations for the past 4 years has been transmitted to 3 separate regulatory and law enforcement bodies, including an Interpol Financial Crimes Unit and a Korean government task force that has been building a case against international cartel activity for 18 months. Kang Jae kept his voice even, operational. "The communication records connecting you personally to the coordination of today's airport attack are part of that package. So are the records connecting Vega's current operations to a conspiracy initiated 10 years ago that involved the fabrication of intelligence documents and the coercion of a senior syndicate official." "You think a package submitted by a private firm?" "The package was submitted by a private firm whose CEO is currently one of the highest profile business figures in South Korea, having arrived at Incheon Airport this morning to announce the country's largest single foreign investment in 4 years, and who survived an assassination attempt at that airport in front of approximately 200 members of the international press. Kang Jae looked at him. The coverage has been running for 8 hours. The pressure on official bodies to respond is not theoretical. Won-gi looked at his desk, at the organized documents that now represented a different kind of liability than they had this morning. Park Do-yoon, he said, is providing a full disclosure in exchange for cooperative status. Do-yoon worked with us for 7 years. His testimony, combined with the financial documentation and communication records, is sufficient. Your attorneys will tell you the same thing. Kang Jae lowered the weapon, not because the threat was gone, but because it was no longer the operative instrument. You have one decision to make tonight: how this ends for you and how much of it you control. That window closes when the formal proceedings begin, which will be sometime tomorrow morning. Won-gi looked at him for a long time. The office was quiet. The city outside the windows continued its indifferent operations, lights moving on the Han River in the distance, Seoul conducting the business of being Seoul at 9:30 in the evening. What do you want? Won-gi said. Everything, Kang Jae said. The full Vega network, names, locations, financial architecture, operational history, not the Korean chapter, the organization. If I give you that, you go from being the man who ran their Korean operations to being the man who took them apart. That distinction matters in a formal proceeding. It won't make everything disappear, but it will determine the shape of what comes next for you. He paused. I'm not offering you a clean exit. There isn't one. I'm offering you the choice between two versions of a difficult future. You have until I leave this building to decide which one. He stepped back from the desk, turned to the door. At the threshold he stopped, because there was one more thing and it needed to be said directly, without operational framing, without the language of strategy and leverage. 10 years ago, he said, a decision was made to destroy my family. The people involved believed they were protecting something, an organization, an arrangement, a balance of power that mattered to them more than the people they were moving around. He did not look back at Won-gi. He looked at the door. I want you to understand that what you're dealing with tonight is not the syndicate boss trying to protect his operation. It's a father who found out what happened to his daughter and has had approximately 12 hours to develop a thorough opinion about it. He walked out. The drive back to the hotel took 22 minutes. His men handled the Baiko situation, securing the premises, managing Won-gi through the initial disclosure process, coordinating with James Osei's team on the communication side. Do-yoon was present for the disclosure, providing verification on the points that required insider confirmation, his voice in the recordings carrying the specific flatness of a man delivering the account of his own dismantling. Kang Jae drove alone. The city moved past the windows in its nighttime configuration, the Han River bridges lit, the apartment towers of Gangnam stacked against the sky, Seoul in the specific beauty of a place that has been built and rebuilt, and built again over decades of complicated history and does not carry the weight of any of it visibly. He had lived in this city his entire life. He had run its underworld for 14 years. He had sat in its study at 3 in the morning and made a decision that had taken a decade to understand the full cost of. And he was driving back now through its nighttime streets with a bullet wound that needed attention and a family that he did not yet have the right to claim, but was, for the first time in 10 years, in the same city as. He did not play music. He did not make calls. He drove, and he breathed, and he let the full weight of the day settle into him the way things settled when you stop managing them. Completely, without filtration, the grief and the relief and the anger and the thing underneath all of it that had no clean name, but that he recognized as the sensation of a man who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has just, for the first time, set it down. Amara was awake when he arrived. She was sitting in the hotel suite's main room with her legs folded under her, wearing different clothes than the morning. Something comfortable, a dark sweatshirt, with a glass of water on the table beside her and a focused expression that suggested she had been awake deliberately rather than failing to sleep. James Osei was in the corner of the room conducting a low conversation on his phone. 2 advanced team members were visible through the connecting door. Zuri was not in the room. He looked the question at James, who indicated toward the suite's smaller sitting room with a tilt of his head. Amara looked at him when he came through the door. She looked at the shoulder, the coat, the overall condition of a man who had spent the day being shot at and conducting operations and driving through a city at night. "Did it work?" she said. "Yes." She nodded, the same nod she had given him in the car when he admitted his shoulder hurt, the nod of someone confirming that the answer was the correct one, that the world had operated as expected. "Wangi," she said, "is cooperating. Do-Yoon, also cooperating. And Vega will take longer, but the structure has been compromised significantly tonight. The legal process will handle most of it from here." He sat down across from her because his body had been requesting this for some time, and he had been declining, and he was no longer in a position to decline. "How much of today do you actually understand?" Amara looked at him with the directness he was beginning to understand was not performed. It was simply how she was built. "I understand that someone made a decision 10 years ago to separate my parents by lying," she said. "I understand that the people connected to that decision tried to use me today as a tool. I understand that you and my mother spent the day taking that apart together." She paused. "I understand that you're my father." The room held that. "Yes," he said. "You didn't know about me." "No, I found a note after your mother left, but I didn't find you." "You looked." For 4 years, she'd covered the trail completely. Amara was quiet for a moment, absorbing this the way she appeared to absorb everything, fully, without rushing toward a conclusion, giving the information the space it needed to be properly understood. "She never said bad things about you," she said. "She never said anything about you. When I asked who my father was, she said it was complicated, and that one day when the time was right, she'd explain. I stopped asking when I was 7 because I could see it cost her something every time I did." He said nothing. There was nothing to say that improved on silence. "But she kept a photograph," Amara said, "in a book she doesn't read anymore but keeps on the top shelf in her London office. I found it when I was 8. I didn't tell her I'd seen it." She looked at him steadily. "It's a picture of both of you, on a rooftop somewhere." She's laughing. He closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. "I have the same photograph," he said. Amara looked at him. Something moved through her face. Not the complicated adult emotion he had been watching her process all day, but something simpler and younger than that, something that belonged to the 10-year-old underneath the extraordinary composure, the child who had wanted to ask and stopped asking at 7 because she could see it cost her mother something. She did not cry. She was her mother's daughter. But she looked at him with the full, unguarded weight of what it meant to be 10 years old and find out that the answer to the question you stopped asking was sitting across from you in a hotel room in Seoul, and it was not the answer you'd constructed in the absence of information. It was something more complicated and more real, and in some ways more painful, and in some ways vastly better. "Okay," she said. The word was very quiet. He looked at her. His daughter. 48 hours ago, he had not known she existed with her specific face, and her specific voice, and her specific quality of attention. And now she was sitting across from him in a dark sweatshirt with a glass of water and 10 years of questions that she had the discipline not to ask all at once. And the accumulated weight of that, of who she was, of who had built her, of what the decade of separation had cost, and what it had also, unexpectedly, produced, was something he was not equipped to contain in any structure he had available. He did not cry either. He was his own kind of person. But he stayed in the chair and he did not look away from her, and he let her look at him for as long as she needed, which was a small thing, and also, under the specific circumstances, the most important thing he had ever done. Zuri was in the smaller sitting room with the lights low, standing at the window with a glass of something she had not been drinking. She heard him come in and did not turn immediately. She gave herself the moment, the last few seconds of a posture she had been holding all day. The composed and armored surface that had gotten her through 14 hours of airports and alleys and confrontations, and the systematic dismantling of the lie that had defined the last decade of her life. Then she turned. She looked at him the way you looked at someone when you were done performing anything. Done with the armor, done with the strategic assessment, just looking at the person in the room and letting the full accumulated reality of them land. "It's done," he said. "I know. James briefed me." She set the glass down on the windowsill. "Wangi's attorneys contacted his office 20 minutes ago. He's going to cooperate." "Yes." Do-yoon's disclosure is being processed. Yes. She looked at him. How's the shoulder? Reopened. I'll have it looked at tonight. You'll have it looked at now. James has a contact. She paused. You are not allowed to bleed to death in my hotel room. I have opinions about what you're allowed to do in my presence, and that's one of them. He almost smiled. He caught it before it fully formed, which she saw because she saw everything. What? She said. You sound the same, he said. When you're telling me what to do, exactly the same. She looked at him for a moment. Her expression shifted. Not toward warmth, not yet. The distance was still there, and it was real distance earned by real years, and it was not going to dissolve in a hotel room in a single night. But something in it had become less defended. Not open, less defended. The specific quality of a wall that has not come down, but has been examined from the inside and found to be, in certain places, no longer structurally necessary. I spent 10 years, she said, building something that had nothing to do with you. I want you to understand that. Apex Horizon is not a response to what happened. It's not about you. It was never about you. It was about me and what I was capable of and what I needed to prove to myself about who I was after someone I trusted made a unilateral decision about my life. She paused. I need you to understand that before anything else. I understand it, he said. I'm not asking you to have built it for any other reason. Good. She turned back to the window briefly, then back to him. She asked me tonight, before you arrived, whether I was going to let you be her father. He waited. I told her that wasn't my decision to make, that it was between the two of you and that she was old enough to have a position on it. Zuri paused. She said she already had a position. What did she say? She said she'd been watching you all day, that she'd seen you take a bullet in the airport, and she'd been in the alley when you faced Do-yoon, and she'd been in the car when you answered her questions honestly, instead of the way adults usually answer children's questions, which is with a simplified version they think will be enough. She paused. She said she thought you were a person who meant what he did more than what he said, and that she respected that, and that she was willing to find out the rest. What? He absorbed this in silence. She's extraordinary, he said. I know. Zuri's voice carried something in it on those two words. The pride, yes, but underneath it the 10 years that had built the things she was proud of. The sleepless London nights and the early years when the business was fragile, and the years when it wasn't, and throughout all of it, the daily work of raising a person alone who deserved more than alone. She got the best parts of both of us, I think. She got more of you. She got your jaw and your instinct for reading a room. She paused. I noticed the second day after she was born. I wasn't pleased about it. He did look at her now with something that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, but occupied the specific territory between them where those two things lived in the same moment. I have to ask you something, she said, and I need the true answer, not the one that serves the situation. Yes. If today hadn't happened, if Apex Horizon had never announced the Soul investment, if we'd never crossed back into your territory, were you going to look for us again? The room was quiet, the Soul skyline in the window behind her, the Han River's light, the city doing what the city did regardless of what happened inside any of its buildings. Yes, he said. I had started again 3 months ago. A different investigator, a different approach. He paused. I'd accepted that you might not want to be found. I hadn't accepted that I had the right to stop looking. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he could see her processing it. All of it, the full architecture of the day and the decade, the manufactured evidence and the fabricated biography, and the 40 minutes with the bracelet, and the 4 years of searching, and the 5 years of trying to be what she had built instead of what he had lost. The photograph in his wallet, and the note with 3 sentences, and the hill above Seoul, and everything that had happened since 11 o'clock this morning. Okay, she said. The same word Amara had used, and for a moment he heard the echo of the child in the mother, the same fundamental quality of a person who had assessed the situation completely and had arrived at a position and was stating it without performance. That's not a yes, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. It's the beginning of a conversation that's going to take a very long time. She looked at him directly. I'm not the woman you married. I'm not asking you to love who I was. If you want to be in our lives, in Amara's life, and in mine, whatever that looks like, at whatever pace the reality of it demands. You're going to have to know who I am now, not who I was on that rooftop. I know, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it. I mean it also. He paused. Who you are now is the woman who built a billion-dollar operation in 9 years while raising a daughter alone, and then walked back into the country that exiled her and dismantled an international cartel's Korean network in a single afternoon. He looked at her. I'm not under any illusion that you need me. I've been aware of that for several hours. Something in her face shifted, the least offended moment he had seen from her since the airport. No, she said quietly. I don't need you. I know. But that's the wrong measure. She looked at the window, then back at him. The right measure is different. The right measure is whether what we build from here is worth the difficulty of building it, whether it's honest, whether it's something Amara grows up watching and understands as an example of what two people can do with a wreckage when they're willing to be completely honest about who caused it and what it cost. Yes, he said. That's the right measure. She nodded, looked at him one more time with that quality of assessment that was not cold, but was real, was genuine, was the look of a woman who trusted her own judgment because she had spent 10 years learning to trust it. Go get your shoulder looked at, she said. Then come back. Amara wants to show you something she's been working on. She won't tell me what it is. She said it's for you. He stood. His shoulder communicated its ongoing opinions. He ignored them with the practiced ease of a man who had been having that argument with his body all day. At the door he stopped. He reached into his coat's inner pocket, his good side carefully, and retrieved a small object. He placed it on the table beside her untouched glass. The room's light caught it. A woman's ring. Simple. Not new. I've carried it since the morning you left, he said. I'm not giving it to you. I'm telling you where it is. She looked at it on the table. She did not touch it. She looked at it with the full, undefended weight of what it meant. The morning she had walked out of the study, the morning she had taken it off and left it on the desk, the morning his world had split irrevocably in two. And she let the meaning of it land completely, rather than managing it. He left the room. 6 months passed. The Vega Network's Korean operations were formally dismantled through a joint proceeding involving 3 countries' financial crimes authorities and 1 Interpol task force. Seo Won-gi received a sentence that reflected both his cooperation and his culpability, the law arriving at its compromised arithmetic as it always did. Park Do-yoon's trial lasted 11 days and produced a result that was neither clean nor comfortable, because his actions had been neither clean nor comfortable, and the law was at least honest about that much. He was 63 years old, and he sat in the courtroom through all 11 days with the stillness of a man who had made his accounting and was not appealing the verdict. The Crimson Tiger Syndicate's criminal operations were dissolved over 4 months through a structured legal process that Kang Jae initiated the week after the Baiko confrontation. It was not a dramatic dismantling. It was paperwork and meetings, and the slow, unglamorous work of converting one kind of power into another kind, the kind that could be named in a public document without destroying the person attached to it. Several senior syndicate members did not cooperate. Several others did. The process was imperfect, as all processes that attempted to convert something built on fear into something built on legitimacy were imperfect because the materials you started with shaped what you could make. He did it anyway. Apex Horizon's sole investment proceeded and produced results that the financial press covered extensively and that Zuri discussed with characteristic economy of language when asked to comment, clearly, directly, without excess. The firm opened a permanent Seoul office. Zuri was in Korea for significant portions of the following months, which was a fact that generated considerable media interest, and that she managed by engaging with it on her terms and ignoring it on everyone else's. Amara enrolled in an international school in Seoul for the spring semester. She adapted with the efficiency that had characterized every other adaptation she had made in her 10 years. She was studying Korean. She was also, according to her homeroom teacher, explaining Korean business culture to her classmates with a specificity that went somewhat beyond the curriculum, which suggested she had been conducting her own research through channels the school was not entirely aware of. She and Kang Jae met twice a week, sometimes 3 times. They walked along the Han River in the afternoons because she had identified it as her preferred environment for conversations she was thinking through. The open space, the movement, the absence of interior walls. She asked him questions about everything: his past, his work, the syndicate, the decisions he had made, and the ones he wished he'd made differently. He answered all of them. He answered the hard ones directly and the impossible ones honestly, which sometimes meant saying, "I don't have a good answer for that," and sitting with her in the discomfort of that instead of smoothing it over. She never smoothed things over. She was her mother's daughter in that regard above all others. One afternoon in early spring, walking along the river in the particular light of a Seoul afternoon that had decided to be kind, she said, "Are you happy?" He thought about it seriously, the way she would have wanted him to, the way she always engaged with things herself. "I think I'm becoming someone who could be," he said. "That's different from being, but it's the first time in a long time I've been moving in that direction." She nodded, processing. "Mom is the same," she said. "She doesn't say it, but I can tell." He said nothing. "She put the ring back on," Amara said. 3 weeks ago. She thought I didn't notice." He walked with that for a moment. The river moving beside them, the city above and behind them on its hills, the spring light doing what spring light did. "She hasn't told me," he said. "I know." Amara looked ahead. "I think she's waiting to see if you notice on your own. It matters to her whether you're paying attention without being told to." He looked at his daughter. This person assembled from two people's best materials and 10 years of a woman's extraordinary work and a quality of self that belonged entirely to neither of them, but was entirely her own. And he understood that she was telling him something, and that she was telling him because she had decided he deserved to know, and that the decision to tell him was itself a statement about where they were and what they were building. "Thank you," he said. "Don't make it a big event," Amara said. "She'll hate that." "I know. Just notice." "I will." She looked at the river. He looked at the river. They walked in the particular comfortable silence of two people who had found, through the wreckage of complicated circumstances, that they occupied the same rhythm. That evening, he met Zuri at the Apex Horizon Seoul office for what had been formally scheduled as a meeting about the infrastructure investment's second phase. The meeting lasted 20 minutes, which was its actual required duration, and afterward they stood at the window of the conference room that looked out over the city. The Han River in the late light, the bridges, the hill on the far side where his mansion still stood, the Seoul skyline in its layered complexity. He looked at her left hand. She was watching the city. She did not look at him, but her hand, resting on the window frame, was turned slightly outward. Enough. The ring caught the light. He stood beside her at the window for a long time, looking at the city they had both shaped in entirely different ways, and that had shaped them in return. He did not make it an event. He did not say anything theatrical. He stood close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and he said quietly, in the same voice he used for things that were true and did not require amplification, "I see it." She did not turn. But something in the line of her shoulders changed. The last small degree of held tension releasing, the final adjustment of a structure that had been built under pressure and was now, for the first time in 10 years, carrying only its own weight. "Good," she said. Outside, Seoul held its shape against the evening sky, full of itself, full of its history and its damage and its reconstruction, the kind of city that had been broken and rebuilt enough times to understand that what you made from the pieces was a matter of decision rather than destiny. They stood at the window and watched it do what it had always done. The city lived, and so did they.